I was married to my ex-husband, Alan, up until just 4 months ago. He and I broke up after I caught him red-handed with his mistress. At the time, I was pregnant and I had been staying at my mother's house for about a week. I decided to surprise Alan by coming back home early. I had planned to cook him a nice breakfast before he went off to work, hoping to do something special for him since he had been telling me how much he missed me. But when I arrived home, I found him in bed, not alone, but with another woman. Of course, I screamed and yelled, probably waking up half the neighborhood in the process. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Alan, in a panic, kept apologizing to me, trying to explain himself. But instead of taking responsibility for what he had done, he actually tried to turn the situation around, telling me that I shouldn't have come home so early and that I should have called him first before showing up. It was as though he was basically blaming me for catching him in the act. I was beyond furious and heartbroken, and I demanded to know who the woman was. But Alan kept avoiding the question. He insisted it didn't matter and tried to deflect by saying that we could talk about it later. But at that moment, there was no later. The woman had absolutely no remorse on her face, and it was clear from the expression she wore that this wasn't the first time she had been in my home. Her demeanor was cold and unfazed, as if she had no care in the world about what was happening. When I asked her if she and my husband were having an affair, she didn't hesitate to coldly nod, acknowledging what she had done without any shame. Alan, on the other hand, yelled at me to ignore her, claiming he was going to explain everything to me later. The woman then scoffed at him and began putting her clothes back on. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She was wearing my red nightdress. I was taken aback. What kind of a woman wore someone else's clothes while sleeping with their husband? I screamed at her to take off my nightdress, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I asked her what the hell she thought she was doing wearing my clothes after sleeping with my husband. The thought of it made my blood boil. She casually said she had nothing to wear for the night, so she had gone through my closet and picked out what she wanted. And then, with a nasty smirk, she added, "It's not like you can fit into these anymore," as she pointed at my pregnant belly. At that moment, I saw red. Who the hell did this woman think she was, coming into my home, sleeping with my husband, and then having the audacity to wear my clothes? Without even thinking, I lost all control and lunged at her, grabbing her hair and yanking it as hard as I could. She screamed in pain, thrashing around, but I was taller and stronger than her, so she couldn't break free. I swear if I hadn't been pregnant, I would have taken her down to the floor and given her a good beating. But I didn't want to put my baby at risk. The woman continued to try and fight back until Alan quickly intervened, pulling her away from me. Then, this woman, her face still full of defiance, shouted at Alan that she was going to kill me for touching her hair and demanded that he stand up for her if he ever wanted to see her again. Her voice had a certain authority. She spoke to Alan as if she was his partner, as if she had every right to control him. This is when I started to realize that she wasn't just some random woman to him. This wasn't a one-night stand. Both of them clearly knew each other quite well. She was talking to him like his girlfriend. Alan, surprisingly, turned on me. He began to scold me for slapping her, telling me I needed to calm down and act more rationally. I couldn't believe it. Here he was, the one who had betrayed me, turning things around to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. I asked him to tell me exactly who she was and what was happening between them. This is when Alan began to tell me that over the months since I had become pregnant, he had felt less and less attracted to me. He explained that as his feelings for me faded, he met Lila, the woman I had caught him with, and that she had been able to satisfy him in ways I never could. Hearing his words, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All those months, all that love I thought we shared meant nothing to him anymore. And then he went on to say that what had started off as just hookups between him and Lila had now turned into something serious. Alan casually told me he had been planning to talk to me about it, but since I was pregnant, he wanted to wait until after I gave birth. He wanted to spare me the pain, he said, as if that was some kind of favor. He had already made his choice to leave me. I couldn't believe the betrayal. While I was pregnant and carrying his child inside me, the father of my baby was out having fun with another woman. Over the 4 years of our marriage, I had supported Alan through everything. His career, his dreams, his struggles. And for what? For him to turn around and stab me in the back like this. The anger and hurt inside me were overwhelming. It felt like all the love I had given, all the sacrifices I had made meant nothing to him. I told Alan there was no reason to wait until after the baby was born to divorce me. If he was already so sure he didn't love me anymore, what was the point of staying married? Why drag it out? His excuses didn't matter to me anymore. Alan tried to argue that we could talk about it later, but I was done listening. The pain of everything he had done was too much, and my frustration boiled over. I told him in no uncertain terms that he needed to pack up his things and leave my house, and take his mistress with him. The audacity of him coming into my home, bringing that woman into my bed was beyond anything I could tolerate. Even if he didn't feel attracted to me anymore, how dare he disrespect me like this? Alan was visibly taken aback. He never expected me to take such a firm stand and tried to argue back, but I wasn't going to back down. I told him if he didn't leave, I would call the police on him. I wasn't going to let him stay in my house a moment longer. Eventually, my ex-husband begrudgingly agreed and started to pack up his things. As they were leaving, Lila had the audacity to taunt me. She mocked me, saying everything Alan had told her about me over the months was true, that I was a cold and calculating woman. She went on, cruelly saying that this was why no man could ever stay with me. Her words stung deeply, and it felt like she was rubbing salt into a wound that I didn't think could hurt anymore. To make matters worse, Alan didn't say a word to defend me. They both left without a single word of apology or remorse. And as soon as the door closed behind them, I broke down. The weight of the betrayal, the hurt, and the loss overwhelmed me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I cried like I had never cried before. But in the midst of that pain, a part of me knew I couldn't let them break me. After all, I had been raised by a single mother, and she had taught me to be strong, stand up for myself no matter what. So, despite how broken I felt, I picked myself up. I wasn't going to let Alan or anyone else take away my sense of self-worth. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to a lawyer, got advice, and filed for divorce. Thankfully, I had been smart enough to have Alan sign a prenup before we got married, which meant our divorce proceedings would be much faster and simpler. Since I was in a far better financial position than he was, I knew this wouldn't be a long battle. The one thing we needed to settle was custody of our child. As the mother, I was granted primary custody of our newborn. I would raise my child, and Alan would have supervised visitation, at least until our child was older, and then maybe we could change the custody arrangements again. I couldn't trust him to be alone with the baby after everything that had happened, and the lawyer made it clear that it was in the best interest of the child, especially given the circumstances. In the end, we both agreed on this. Now, 4 days ago, I finally gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. The experience was overwhelming, but I had my mom with me the whole time. It was a relief to have her there, as I needed all the comfort I could get throughout the entire birthing process. I was still at the hospital recovering when Alan came to visit me and our baby the next day. Surprisingly, he seemed genuinely proud to be a father, despite all the anger I felt towards him. I wanted us to at least try to be good co-parents for the sake of our child. Our son was the one thing that mattered now. After a little while, my mom decided to head back home to freshen up. She had been awake with me for what felt like hours, and I could tell she needed rest. I, too, was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and I really wanted to get some sleep. Alan assured me he would stay in the room and watch over our son while I rested. I told him to wake me up if our son cried, as he would probably need to be fed, and Alan promised me he would. So imagine the sheer panic I felt when I woke up 3 hours later to my mother frantically asking me, "Where's your baby?" I was disoriented and confused as I tried to gather my thoughts. We looked around the hospital room, but my baby and Alan were nowhere to be found. My heart started racing. I could feel the adrenaline pumping as I realized something was terribly wrong. I immediately asked the nurses if they had seen Alan or my son, and one of them finally told me, to my horror, that she had seen Alan walking out of the hospital with my baby. The moment those words hit me, I was frozen in disbelief. Alan had no right to leave with my child without my permission, especially after he had promised me he would stay and watch over him. My mind was reeling, and I could barely process what was happening. I grabbed my phone and started calling him frantically, but he didn't pick up. Each unanswered call only made my anxiety worse. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was on the verge of having a panic attack. Where did Alan take him? What if my son woke up hungry? What would he eat? Was Alan planning to disappear with him? To take my baby away from me? All kinds of disturbing questions flooded my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. All I could think about was my baby and whether he was okay. After almost multiple missed calls, Alan finally picked up, or so I thought. But to my shock, it wasn't Alan's voice on the other end. It was Lila. She calmly informed me that my baby was with her and that Alan had brought him back to their place to show off our newborn to her, since I had not allowed her to visit me at the hospital. This was true. Alan had asked me if he could bring Lila with him, and I had refused since I didn't want to see her. I asked her how my son was and to give the phone to Alan so I could give him a piece of my mind about leaving with my child without permission. Lila then told me that my son had woken up shortly after Alan had taken him there and was crying, clearly hungry. So Alan had hurried to a grocery store to buy some formula so they could feed him. She then added that Alan had left his phone behind by mistake, which is why I had to wait if I wanted to talk to him. I was absolutely taken aback. My son had woken up hungry, crying, and she wanted me to wait? Also, what right did they have to give my son formula when I, as his mother, hadn't agreed to that? I immediately demanded that she drive back to the hospital and return my son back to me so I could feed him. But Lila argued that she and Alan knew what they were doing, claiming that they were going to be my son's parents, now, along with me, and that they knew what was best for him also. She said I needed to stop freaking out and that after they fed him, Alan would bring the baby back to me. Her tone was so cold, so dismissive that she sounded like a deranged psycho who was trying to justify keeping my hungry infant child away from me. I continued to urge her to bring my son back, but she kept saying how she and Alan had read parenting books, so they were prepared to handle my child without me. Her words only fueled my fury. At that moment, I knew I had to act fast. Without hesitation, I cut the call with Lila and immediately dialed the police. I told them that my ex-husband had kidnapped my newborn son and left him with a stranger. My heart was racing as I explained how terrified I was for my baby's safety, especially since I had just given birth a day ago. The fear that something could happen to him, that he might be hurt or scared without me, consumed me. I needed to make sure he was returned to me safely. The police responded quickly, and within an hour, Alan and Lila were arrested for kidnapping and endangering my child. Soon after, they brought my son back to the hospital. I rushed to change him and feed him, and while he seemed fine physically, I could tell he had been crying for hours. His little face was red, and the sight of it broke my heart. The whole situation was a nightmare, but I was glad that at least my baby was back where he belongs, with me. Since then, my ex and Lila have been out on bail, but they're facing charges and will have to appear in court soon. I made it clear that I wasn't dropping the charges, and I wanted to see them punished for what they did. This wasn't something I could just overlook. My baby's safety was at stake, and they needed to answer for what they had done. At first, Alan was adamant that he hadn't done anything wrong and that I was overreacting and that I shouldn't have called the police on them. He tried to defend himself, claiming that he was just trying to show off our son, but it was obvious that he had no sense of how serious the situation was. He thought he could just walk away without facing consequences. However, I guess after talking to a lawyer, Alan's tune has changed. Now he's asking me to reconsider the charges, claiming that he's facing jail time and begging for me to forgive him. So Reddit, AITA, to everyone asking why Alan and Lila would do something like this, I'm just as stunned as all of you. When we got divorced, I thought we could at least manage to be supportive co-parents for the sake of our son. But what Alan has done goes far beyond crossing any line. It's unforgivable. He had no right to just take my baby and leave, especially when he didn't even have primary custody. The fact that he would take my son without informing me or considering how it would affect me or the baby shows a complete lack of respect for me as his mother. Also, it's not just about custody, it's about basic decency and responsibility as a parent. He doesn't get to make decisions like this without consulting me, especially when it involves our one-day newborn son. I've seen some comments asking why I called the cops, and honestly, it makes me think that some of you don't fully understand what it means to be a parent, especially a mother. Any parent who has a child, especially a newborn, knows you can't just separate a baby from their mother right after birth. Newborns need constant care. They need to be fed, changed, and held. It's not just about a few hours. They need care 24/7. When my son returned to me, he was crying. His diaper hadn't been changed and he was hungry. It broke my heart to see him in that state. No one, especially not Alan and Lila, had the right to put my baby in that situation. As a mother, I had to do what was necessary to protect my child, and make sure he was safe. The police were the only way to ensure that he was returned to me immediately. How could my ex and Lila just unilaterally decide to buy and feed my newborn formula without even discussing it with me? That decision wasn't theirs to make, especially when I'm the mother. It's completely outrageous. More importantly, how could my ex leave my baby with someone I don't even know properly? Someone I only know because I found her sleeping with him. What if something had happened to my baby while he was with her? What if she had done something to harm him? How could he be so reckless, so careless? The thought alone terrifies me. I don't regret calling the cops, not for a second. What they did was wrong, and I'm not going to just let it go. I'm so thankful that my baby is back with me and that he's okay. But I'm going to make sure Alan and Lila are held accountable for what they did. My priority is my son, and I will do everything in my power to protect him forever, even if it means making tough decisions. It's been a week since my last update. I'm relieved to say that me and my baby are doing fine now. We're back home, and my mom is staying with us to help out. I've also made sure to set up cameras everywhere just in case. I'm not taking any chances with my son's safety after everything that's happened. As for my ex, he has been begging me for mercy, trying to get me to reconsider the charges. He's apparently scared of facing jail time, but I've been ignoring him. So the other day, he tried to come over to my place and talk to me forcefully. When he showed up unannounced, looking all flustered and desperate, I didn't let him come in. Instead, I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. My son was asleep inside, and I wasn't about to let this man wake him up. Alan basically told me how, as the father of my child, he had every right to take our son wherever he wanted me to stop acting like the scorned ex-wife and just let everything go. He wanted me to drop the charges immediately and tried to talk with the cops about how it was all just a big misunderstanding. His audacity was truly unbelievable. I told him I wasn't going to do anything like that when it wasn't true. Then, with complete disregard for everything I'd been through, everything we had gone through, he told me that this was apparently the reason he'd fallen out of love with me in the first place. He looked me dead in the eye and said with a patronizing tone, "This whole situation, how you've acted, is exactly why I couldn't be with you anymore. You're so controlling, so rigid. This is why I cheated. You're so impossible to deal with. No wonder things fell apart between us. You suffocate everything you touch." I was taken aback by his choice of words. Before I could react, he continued to yell at me. "Do you really think you're the only parent here? This is my son too, and I deserve your respect. You had no right to call the cops and get me arrested." To him, it seemed like the entire situation was my fault. I was the one who had pushed him to cheat. I was the one who had made him fall out of love. I was the one who had made him feel trapped. He seemed completely oblivious to the gravity of what he had done and seemed to think that just because he was the father, he could do whatever he wanted with no consequences. I took a breath, standing firm as I looked him dead in the eyes and told him that his manipulation wasn't going to work on me anymore. I wasn't some naive woman he could walk all over like before. "You don't get to stand there and tell me why you fell out of love with me. You cheated, you lied, and you're the one who destroyed everything. I'm glad we got a divorce and I don't care about you anymore. But this isn't about us. It's about my son. You took him to see your girlfriend just one day after he was born, while I was still recovering at the hospital. You and I both know you had no right to do that. Now you think I'm supposed to just let go? I don't care if you're scared of jail time, because I'm not going to drop the charges." His jaw clenched, and I could tell he was trying to come up with something to say, but I cut him off. You don't get to play the victim anymore, Alan. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. You think you're entitled to mercy because you share DNA with my son? Let me tell you that being a father is about actions, not biology. And your actions have done nothing but prove how unfit and immature you are to make any decisions for him. I will make sure the court punishes you for this. I then shut the door on his face while he continued to shout from the other hand. He crossed the line, and I'm not backing down. As for Lila, she has continued to send me the nastiest, most unhinged messages since that day. It's as though she made it her personal mission to harass me at every turn. Every time I think she can't stoop any lower, she surprises me. The audacity of that woman knows no bounds. She's written to me saying that she was looking forward to becoming my son's new mommy, but that I ruined her chance out of sheer jealousy. Because I got her arrested, she then told me how she wished for me and my son to die in a car accident, and that we didn't deserve to live. I was stunned reading that message. It was beyond disgusting. What kind of person wishes death on someone, especially a mother and her child? This is utterly vile and disrespectful. I've shown all of Lila's vile messages to my lawyer, and we're taking immediate action. We're planning to get a restraining order against Lila as soon as possible. Given how threatening and malicious her messages have been, we feel it's necessary to ensure that she stays away from me and my baby forever. It's been a month and a half since my last update. The day of the court hearing finally arrived yesterday. Both Alan and Lila had their lawyers with them, of course trying to downplay what had happened and avoid taking any responsibility. Alan's defense was filled with excuses. He tried to claim that he was just trying to be a good father by taking the baby to Lila since I was asleep, and that he was going to return the baby to me later that day. He said it was basically my fault for not allowing him to bring Lila with him to visit our son. Apparently, he never meant to cause any harm and claimed that I freaked out due to my hormones and called the cops for no reason. But regardless of his words, the reality of the situation spoke for itself. He had taken my baby without permission, left him in the care of a woman who I barely knew, and had basically ignored my rights as a mother. There was no excuse for what he had done. He begged the judge for some leniency. Lila, as expected, also didn't take any responsibility. She tried to act like she had every right to be involved with my son, as if she was now some kind of a stepmother. She claimed I had a grudge against her ever since she had won my husband from me, and that I was trying to make her life difficult unnecessarily. At that point, my lawyer stood in the courtroom and began to read out all of Lila's vile messages aloud, filled with cruelty and threats. It was necessary for the judge to understand the kind of person my ex's girlfriend really was, and why she needed to stay far away from me and the baby. I could see the shock on the faces of those present. Clearly, Lila had no respect for me, for my son, or for our boundaries. After everything was presented, the messages, the timeline of events, the police reports, and the testimony from my side, the judge was clear in their ruling. Alan was found guilty of kidnapping and endangering the welfare of a child. Lila, too, was charged with contributing to the child's endangerment. In the end, Alan was given a sentence that involved 1 year probation and mandatory parenting classes. If he breaks the rules of his probation, he will face jail time. Lila was given a restraining order, and she was ordered to stay away from me and my family. The restraining order meant I wouldn't have to worry about Lila sending me any more hateful messages, and the court's decision reinforced that I, as a mother, had the final say in how my child is raised. Both of them were also required to pay restitution for the emotional distress they had caused to me and the baby. I could see both Alan and Lila seething with rage by the end of the court proceeding, but there was nothing they could do anymore. They got what they deserved. 6 months have passed since the court hearing, and life has slowly begun to feel more like normal again. My son, who I still can't believe is already 6 months old, has brought so much joy into my life. Every milestone he hits, his first smile, the first time he rolled over, and now he's almost sitting up on his own, makes everything worth it. I've been focusing on making sure he grows up in a stable, loving environment, surrounded by family and friends who truly care about him. My mom visits us as much as she can, and I'm so grateful for her support. She's been a huge help with everything from taking care of my son during the night to offering emotional support when I've needed it most. I honestly don't know how I would have done it without her. As for Alan and Lila, they've both been completely out of the picture. Alan did try to reach out once or twice, but I didn't respond. I'm done with him. I've made it clear that my son and I are moving forward without him. And that's exactly what we're doing. As for Lila, the restraining orders have worked, and I haven't had any direct contact with her since the court hearing. Honestly, there are still moments when I look back at everything that happened with Alan and Lila, and the anger and hurt creep back in. But I try not to let those emotions consume me. What matters now is my son and the life we're building together. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.